Hey BookTube, it's V, and it has been a long time since I've done a recent reads video, so today I'm going to talk to y'all about all the books I've read over the last couple months, and let's get right to it. Stay to the end for the Dresden Files stuff that I've read recently. The first book is The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. This is a short story, and it's a book that I gave 3 stars to because even though I thought it was well written, I really didn't enjoy it, and I think that had mostly to do with me. This was around the time when I lost Gigi the Doggo Princess, and I really needed something that was like dark and messed up to make me feel better about myself, instead of this slapstick, found family, funny story that also involves a lot of things that made me think. And that really probably wasn't a very fair rating, and I definitely want to look at Zen Cho's work later on. But this book is about a nun who joins a band of thieves to go do some stuff with some treasure, and it turns out that treasure is holy relics, and she doesn't really know how to feel about that. But there's a really good point at the end, and it's a story that I did not imagine going in the direction that it did, and I think that it did pretty well. It just wasn't what I wanted to read at the time, which made it very annoying. The next book that I read was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This was a book that I didn't enjoy as much as I thought I was going to, but I also thought it was very well done, and I related a lot to the characters. So this is a story about some suburban housewives in South Carolina in the 1980s during the Satanic Panic and all that jazz, figuring out that one of their neighbors is a vampire and bad things start happening, and it's up to them to save the community because nobody else will. They think that this guy is like a really cool guy. He's going to make them all rich with this real estate deal. This guy's actually preying on the Black community in this town, and there's a lot of discussions about race and how you treat people, and how even though you think that you're a good person who doesn't treat people badly, you really are when you're being complacent. This book is low-key woke, which is something that I really like about it. And it's something that you can give to your friends and family who watch a certain news station too much and make them think about things a little bit differently. Also in this book, the main character takes care of her husband's mother who has memory issues. And I grew up with my mom taking care of my dad's mother who also had memory issues, and that just sort of resonated with me because I know that that's a really hard situation to be in, both the person going through it and the person who has to take care of them, because those types of medical concerns are no joke. And it also makes you think about how we treat people who are caregivers when they're family versus when they're hired help, and sort of all the thoughts that go along with that. Anyways, pretty good book. I highly recommend it. And it has all the horror and gore and all that sort of stuff. It was scary. It was fun. The next book I read was Priest of Lies by Peter McLean. This is book 2 in the War for the Rose Throne quartet. I'll learn how to talk eventually, y'all. This is a series I really love. I recently read the sequel to that, Priest of Gallows, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this is a series that just grabs you by the horns and doesn't stop, and I love it. It's about a bunch of fantasy gangsters in a fantasy world who also get dragged into some espionage and some political stuff. And there's a lot of similarities between how these gangs are run and how the government is run, which I think is really fascinating to think about. Peter McLean, the author, is also somebody that I interact with on Twitter, so hopefully he doesn't mind me being like a fangirl about his work, but I really enjoy it. And the last book, Priest of Crowns, is coming out, I think, August 4th. For the Kindle and the audiobook versions, and then paperbacks come out on November 8th. So if this is a series that you're interested in, it's almost complete, and you're not going to have to wait around very long in order to get to the last book. So get on it, doggone it. After that, I read The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. And this is a book that I absolutely loved and a bunch of people hated, and I don't want to be insulting, but this is a book about a woman named Jane who gets married to a doctor as sort of a marriage of convenience, because she doesn't want to be a burden on the people who took her in after her parents passed away. And that doctor is from a rich family, and they have this estate, but the estate is haunted, and she slowly figures out like what's all going on with that. She literally gets gaslit, which I think is hilarious because there's gaslighting and her husband lies to her a lot, and it just makes sense. But the end is a little confusing to some people, and I'm going to stop there or else I'm going to be really mean. But this is a book that was fucked up in the best possible way, and I loved it. And I think that books that make you think aren't a bad thing. After that, I went back to Grady Hendrix and I read The Final Girl Support Group, and I did not like this book as much as I thought I was going to. This is a book that has a really interesting premise. You have a bunch of women who were the final girls in a bunch of really bad situations that got made into horror movies later on. And if you don't know what a final girl is the last surviving girl in a horror movie who usually ends up defeating the villain. There's a lot of thought that goes into horror movies and sort of what all the tropes are and everything, and I'm not an expert on that, but apparently Grady Hendrix is. He wrote like an entire book about it. And I feel like if I had read his works on the literature and the genre as a whole, I would have understood it a little bit better. I just knew that there was something there that's probably a lot more interesting and a lot more thought-provoking than I gave it when I was actually reading this book. And anyways, these final girls, their villains come back and they have to figure out what the hell's going on and hopefully make sure that there's not another reoccurrence of some of the things that made them final girls in the first place. After that, I read the book, The 10,000 Doors of January. This is another book that's low-key woke that you can give to your relatives and make them think about things that they've never thought about before, and in that way it is magical. But this is a book about a girl named January who is of mixed heritage, and she lives in the house of a billionaire, sort of Rockefeller, Vanderbilt type. And her father works for him, going to different countries, finding artifacts for him to bring back and sell to his friends, and they have this like little archaeology club thing. It has very big colonialism vibes and a message that colonialism is bad. And the main character's last name is Scala, which actually means scholar. And you get into a lot of thematic things as the main character is discovering more things about her father and her family and their past. And of course she escapes and then goes on to find out more stuff. And it's a really, really good story. I think the writing was absolutely gorgeous. And it's also narrated beautifully by a woman whose first name is January, which I thought that was really awesome. She also narrates the book The Change, which just came out, if you've ever read that. And it's a book that I highly recommend if you like beautiful thematic writing. I did a video on this. It's Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And I didn't really like this. I thought that it was very predictable, and I was looking for something that was more like horror and scary, and this was more like a family story that had some horror elements in it. Basically, our main character inherits a house that her parents escaped from with her when she was a very young child. They said that it was haunted and wrote a book about it, and the book became super famous. And that ended up alleviating a lot of like money problems they had. And I will say this, the ending was really good because there's a twist, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because that's going to spoil it for you. But the ending was good. It was a little bit too soapy and family melodramatic for my taste. I also did a video on this. It's The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the second book in the Bloodsworn saga. It is a big old chunker. I thought I was going to finish it in a day because I had an arc of it on my Kindle. Oh yeah, some of these books I got ARCs for. I got free copies. I should probably tell you about that. Full disclosure. And of course I didn't, because it turned out to be like a 600 or 700 page book, and I'm not that fast of a reader right now. But I really enjoyed this book. It's very much like dark fantasy, not quite into grimdark, but kind of getting there. This book has multiple points of view. You have one woman who's trying to find her son who was kidnapped. You have another character who's a sniveling little coward boy, and he's very, very pragmatic, so his part was actually a lot of fun to read. And then you have some characters in different point of view chapters who have magical powers, and because of that, they're sort of tried to be controlled. And they're in war bands that are basically, one is trying to break the whole like feudal system where the magical people are forced to do labor, and the other one is trying to defeat the evil dragon that's helping those people out with a very good goal, because they're basically going to destroy the world. I don't mean destroy the economic system, like that would be perfectly fine. But this dragon basically wants to like take over the world and turn every living thing into her servant, and she wants to eat people on the spot for no reason, and she's just not a good dragon. And this book made me think a lot about how the ends might justify the means, but also sometimes you have really terrible people that latch on to really worthy causes and just try to make the world burn. And I'm really interested to see how this story pans out. I think that the next book doesn't really have a release date yet, but I'm excited to see how the series ends. After that, I read Siren Queen by Ni Vo, and this is a book I also did a video on. Basically, you have a Chinese-American girl in the 1930s who lives in Los Angeles. She starts getting parts, and then she realizes that the person who's been getting her those parts in movies doesn't have her best interest in mind. So she goes to somebody who's a veteran of the Hollywood scene, basically trades the last 20 years of her life in exchange for whatever she needs to do in order to get into the movie business on her own, and she does that. But then the rest of the book is her basically trying to figure out how to be herself and not get consumed by these movie studios. And the movie studios have a lot of fairy and fae vibes, because you have a lot of deals, you have a lot of exchanging things like your soul for favors. You also kind of have this wild hunt thing going on where they end up sacrificing some of the actors and actresses in order to fuel the power that keeps the studio going. And this is like magic and metaphors and real life stuff and all sort of like jumbled into one. And the writing is really, really beautiful, and I highly recommend it. This was a great book. The next book I read was Steel Guardian by Cameron Cole. I read this book as part of the self-published science fiction contest, and I'm not going to talk about most of those books because I didn't enjoy it, partially because I'm not really a big sci-fi person, and partially because this book in particular was just very formulaic. It went on a lot more than it should have. Like, it was way too long. I just found everything to be annoying and sort of heavy-handed and very amateur. This is a story about a robot who is a cleaning robot, and then the apocalypse happens and he's just traveling from like hotel to hotel trying to find work. And then he finds a baby, and he's like, oh my god, I need to keep this baby alive. And then we get the same story over and over again for a long time, where basically he tries to go do something to take care of the baby cries, and everybody's like, oh my god, we gotta take this baby from this robot, and then he has to like run away, and bad things happen to people who try to help him. And there's some thematic things about roles, and are we all basically expected to do a certain role? Is that what we're predisposed to? Is that what we're best at, and what should be expected of us? But this book didn't really have like the caliber of writing to carry on that sort of thematic conversation. And quite frankly, I was really happy when the book was over because I wanted to throw it through the windshield, but it was an audiobook and it's virtual, so I couldn't exactly do that. But apparently the other judges in the self-published science fiction contest enjoyed it, so maybe I just don't like sci-fi and this wasn't my thing, or maybe they just have bad taste and I rule, or maybe I'm just a terrible person who hates good books. I don't know. Leave me a comment down in the description if you've read this and want to talk about it. Comments, not description. Comments. Getting into some Dresden Files content, because I know that's why most of y'all come to my channel. I read Heroic Hearts by Jim Butcher. This is an anthology book with a bunch of different short stories from different series, and the only ones that I had read that were from series that I had read were the one from Dresden Files and the one from Iron Druid, and both of those were fantastic. The Dresden Files one has Toot Toot and Mr. the Cat teaming up to save Castle Dresden. And the one from Iron Druid featured Oberon trying to help Atticus pull someone out of a fire, and that one was really cool. All the other stories were really good too. I discovered a lot of authors and series that I want to get into later on, but there were also some stories where I felt like I was interjecting like part of the way through the series where these stories were supposed to make a lot more of an emotional impact on me as a reader, and they didn't because I didn't know the backstories. But that's my problem, that, like, I wasn't the person who those stories were written for, so it's okay. And apparently in the audiobook, you have all the narrators from all the different series doing the short story from the series that they narrate on the regular. So I got some James Marsters, I got Luke Daniels, I got all the other narrators, and it was a good time. I also got an arc of that book, just the ebook copy from NetGalley, so full disclosure on that. After that, I listened to Shadow Man, which is a book about the FBI's behavioral science unit and sort of profiling of certain offenders. And I thought that this book was really well researched. I don't think it was the most exciting story I had ever read, but basically the point is that the polygraphs and all the different tests that they had originally thought were foolproof, which now we know are absolute garbage, were wrong. And the guy that all the evidence kept coming to ended up being the guy that did it. And the only thing that sort of kept them going on that train of thought was the fact that they had this behavioral profile of the person. And their suspect matched it, and all the evidence pointed to them anyways, and then they were able to get a confession. And it was an interesting story. Not the most fascinating, not the most depraved guy, but it was an interesting story, and it was something that I checked out from my local library, so it didn't cost me anything, and I probably wouldn't listen to it again anyways, but I had a good time while I was listening to it. The next thing that I read is also Dresden, and it is The Law. This is touted as Dresden Files 17.5 or 17.2. I don't know what Amazon has it listed as right now, but it seems to be a novella that's enough of an impact to be like a book between 17 and 18, instead of just being a short story. And this one is narrated by Jim Butcher, who's the author, instead of James Marsters, who is Spike from Buffy, and who narrates all the other Dresden stuff. And at first, I was a little bit concerned about that, but to be completely honest, Jim Butcher did a better job than James Marsters did in the first couple Dresden Files books, before he found his groove and everything. And I was impressed that an author could actually be a good book narrator. I know a lot of authors, especially in the indie space, try to narrate their own books, and they fail epically because it's a completely different skill set, and it takes a long time to be able to do it well. And so I'm really impressed that Jim Butcher was actually able to do it well. But without going into spoilers, Harry sort of goes back to his roots, does a private investigations case like he would earlier in the series, and then the story arc basically shows him going from that to whatever the hell he is now in a post-Battleground world. Battleground being the book that came out before this. A lot of stuff happened. I'm trying to be as vague as possible in case you don't read Dresden Files. Even though if you don't read Dresden Files, what the hell are you doing on my channel? Because that's what most of y'all come here for. But I have a video that I'm going to do on the law and basically what it tells us about Harry's character, because I think it's really interesting and really important for information that we're going to need to have going into the book 12 Months, which is the next book in the series. And it made me very, very happy to have both this and then the short story and Heroic Hearts come out within like a month or two of each other during this sort of hiatus from a main Dresden Files book. Coming in near the end, and this is another arc that I got that I read way later than I was supposed to, but oh my god, I freaking love this book. All the Seas of the World by Guy Gavriel Kay. First of all, if you've been on my channel, you know that I am madly in love with Guy Gavriel Kay's writing, and I think it's beautiful and perfect. And I go into his books expecting something, and I always get it, and I am always beyond delighted to have it. All the Seas of the World is about a couple of pirates, and they end up going on a mission that changes the geopolitical landscape of their world forever, and they end up getting a lot of power and money out of doing this thing, even though it was very, very risky. So yeah, high risk, high reward, that's kind of how it goes. But this is a book about how if you help people in power, they end up giving some of their power and resources to you. There's also all these like little decisions that might not make sense in the moment that can lead to big consequences later on. And this is also a book that was sold as a standalone, and it can be a standalone, but I highly recommend that you at least read A Brightness Long Ago before you read this book, because it comes into the world chronologically like 20 years before All the Seas of the World. I might not have said that right. So A Brightness Long Ago, read that before you read All the Seas of the World. It will make All the Seas of the World even more impactful and beautiful and just hard-hitting than if you enter Guy Gavriel Kay's world with just reading that book. But it's incredible. If you love beautiful, slow burn, historical fantasy in sort of a Renaissance setting, you're going to like this. And finally, the most recent book that I have finished is Priest of Gallows by Peter McLean. This is the third book in the War for the Rose Throne series, and the fourth book, like I said earlier, comes out August 4th. Without giving away spoilers for the entire series, this is very heavy on the espionage aspect. You have our beloved Thomas Piety, who is trying to move forward from being a gang leader to being a spy, and things go down. One of the things that this book really made me appreciate is that the series was definitely planned out from the beginning. Everything fits, everything makes sense without it being super predictable. You don't have the same discussion about power and the whole like Machiavelli's drinking buddy vibes that you get from the first two books, but you have more of a enforcer in your face version of that discussion. And it's really interesting because instead of being the leader this time, Thomas is somebody else's minion. Stuff goes down. It is extremely dark. If you don't like grimdark, you're probably not going to like the series, but it was delightful. I cannot wait for the next book to come out, and it's probably the most underrated series that I have read in the entirety of this channel. If you like what I do, please hit the subscribe button and join the Cap Nation. We'd love to have you. I post bookish videos whenever I can get around to it because I am a busy adult with many important things to do. And if you like Dresden Files content, they take a long time for me to make, but I do make a lot of Dresden Files videos, so you should check those out. Like, share, subscribe on all your social media, and if you think that I suck at this, leave me a comment down below, and I will try to suck better next time. Bye!